Welcome to the Heal Podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Goris, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. And I've discovered on my journey that so much more is possible than we can begin to imagine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heal Podcast. Today, I am with an amazing woman. Her name is Victoria Strong, and her story is remarkable, and it just shows how a mother's love is powerful enough to change the world. Victoria is a disability advocate, a writer, a speaker, the executive director of the Gwendolyn Strong Foundation, and a proud mother of 3. After her 6-month-old daughter, Gwendolyn, was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy, SMA type 1, and given no hope for survival, Victoria and her husband, Bill, created the Gwendolyn Strong Foundation, GSF, to do something in the face of nothing. From Gwendolyn's hospital bed, they began advocating to pass federal legislation to streamline the clinical trial process for all rare diseases, get SMA newborn and carrier screening federally endorsed, and lobby to eliminate insurance lifetime cap and pre-existing condition penalties. During Gwendolyn's 7 years of life, GSF was featured in New York Times, Today Show, NPR, and raised over $3 million to fund research around the globe, including a transformational gene therapy treatment that changed the course of SMA, a previously terminal disease with no treatment options. GSF also provides practical financial support to help with the overwhelming expenses of life with a profound disability, and created Never Give Up, a nonprofit apparel brand to inspire resilience through life's journey. After Gwendolyn's death, and with FDA approval of treatments in process, Victoria turned her sights towards building Gwendolyn's Playground, the first fully inclusive destination playground in Santa Barbara, California, with the belief that not only do all children have the right to access play, but play is an opportunity to create relationships and dismantle disability stigma. A 7-year process that will be the centerpiece of a 10-acre city park, Victoria successfully spearheaded a $6 million capital campaign and is now embarking on a $2 million endowment fund. Groundbreaking for this park is planned for 2024. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I met you at our good friend Mary Firestone's event, trauma healing, beautiful retreat in Montecito a couple weeks ago. And when I heard your story, I was like, I want to share your story and Gwendolyn's story with our audience, because I'm all about just possibility and overcoming, when people take away your hope. I just believe that so much more is possible than we're led to believe sometimes, especially by the authorities or people we look to, for knowledge and expertise, in this case, doctors. So thank you for coming today and sharing your story. Tell us a little bit about Gwendolyn and how this all began.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always say it's Gwendolyn's magic, because I feel like I always had the skill set, but I didn't necessarily feel pulled to do advocacy work. I lost my mom to brain cancer when I was 22, and I didn't feel it then. But I will say, I think that actually losing my mom and grieving and having that experience did give me a tool set that I didn't have previously. And so when Gwendolyn was diagnosed, I think it lit a spark in me that I knew what doing nothing looked like. I knew what, just waiting for someone to die looked like. And that was the advice that the neurologist said. Literally, his words were, there's nothing you can do. You have maybe 6 months. Just wait for her to die. And as a mother, as a parent, that was impossible. How could I just bide time? And I think because Gwendolyn was a child, there was, and so full of life. I think, she, with her, she was initially, we were first hospitalized at 3 months old. And she was, a babbling baby that morning. I was taking potential Christmas card pictures, with her beaming and smiling in a Santa hat. And we happened to have our pediatrician appointment that day. And I brought up a few concerns. She wasn't reaching out for toys. I was following along on those what to expect books. Mm-hmm. And she had been meeting all those milestones. And suddenly there were just a few things that I thought, well, I'll bring them up. And as he examined her, literally, she started to decline during the appointment. Wow. And now what I know is that, one of my concerns was she had been such a great nurser, and she was fussing through feedings. And so now I know she wasn't getting enough calories to actually maintain her level of capability. And for us, it happened all very, very quickly. She was smiling that morning. By that night, and thankfully our pediatrician hospitalized us. She was completely paralyzed and probably would have died in her sleep, and we would have thought it was SIDS. So that's where this disease is so fast-paced that oftentimes people experience it before they even get a diagnosis. And so we spent her, a whole month in the hospital, her first Christmas and New Year's in the hospital. At that time, we thought she would be okay. We thought she had infant botulism. She was given the treatment for that, but it didn't work. They weren't sure what was going on. And she was being monitored in the hospital. So we, kind of just followed along. That experience also, I think, set me up for advocacy. There was one neurologist in our town, Santa Barbara's a small town, who was kind of the authority. And these newer doctors mentioned SMA to us, and he refused to do the simple blood test for it. He said she's too fat and happy. That she's too cute of a baby, basically. And he had reasons about insurance that they won't cover it if she does have it. It was kind of the stuff that didn't make any sense. And now I know, there would have been changes when you get an actual diagnosis. She would have had a feeding tube put in, and just different things. So in a lot of times that misdiagnosis period, it was 3 months long. We were lucky she survived that. But again, when I reflect back on our story, I always think there are these things that kind of just continue to set me up for advocacy, because during those 3 months, we didn't advocate, we didn't demand, we didn't challenge the system. And so when she was 6 months old, we got the official diagnosis. The neurologist literally just called me and told me those horrible words of just wait for her to die, and said literally there's nothing. He didn't recommend an expert. He didn't tell me any information. And so I think that was when it all started. I was devastated, obviously. That was when it all kind of started to shift, because little things that had happened all along the way, I kept thinking, but why wouldn't they test for it? I had even asked for prenatal testing. Why isn't that in our system? So there were just little things that kept me questioning. And so what ended up happening, my sister, who was on the East Coast and obviously feeling helpless, what was she supposed to do? She asked permission, could she call experts, try and find experts. And I didn't want to let go of my baby, so I was, of course, that's fine. And then she sent us an email and said, these are all their names. I've left messages. You can call them at this time. And so we did. My husband and I took different people, and we contacted every single expert around the world for SMA, and even some who were just loosely associated with muscular dystrophy. And what's amazing to me is they all called us back. And that just simple act of kindness lit another spark. It gave me some hope. Even though They were not giving me much to go on. They all said the same thing. There were no treatments. There weren't even clinical trials at that time. But what they did say is they knew exactly what caused the disease, which is almost unheard of, specifically in neurology. They knew the exact gene that caused it. It had been documented for over 100 years, so they knew exactly, how the disease would progress. So there was a lot known about it. And even more, there were researchers who wanted to study it, who were, actively searching for funding so that they could try new theories. And so then that seemed simple. All you need is funding? You mean, I know you don't have treatments yet, but you have ideas, and that's something. So it's like all these conversations lit a little spark and a little spark. We also found out that there were things we could do for Gwendolyn's care. We could give her a feeding tube so that she could get enough nutrition so she could breathe. We could give her a BiPAP breathing machine to help her get comfortable. And so fortunately, Stanford was an SMA center, and we could drive to that because she was not well enough to fly. That was the other thing. They all said, don't fly with her. And so we were able to drive to Stanford and be seen within a week of her diagnosis. And there we met, experts who saw not just one child, but they were actually had relationships with older children with this disease. So there was hope. And so that's kind of how it all started. And so we were in the hospital again for a month, but this time was very different. Instead of just listening to the experts, we were asking questions. But why can't we do this? But why is it this way? And pretty soon, what I really realized is a lot of times it's the reason we do things are really simply just because that's how it's always been done. And so, we started really asking, well, who do we challenge for that? And sometimes it was the NIH, sometimes it was the FDA, sometimes it was, the American Board of Pediatrics, for example. And so we started writing letters, we started lobbying Congress, and we started talking to other advocates and learning what was needed and how could we be of service.
Wow. And was Gwendolyn your first child?
Yeah, Gwendolyn was our first. And so that was another thing. We were able to drop everything and just rally around her and her needs and live in the hospital for however long we needed to. And then she was predicted to be sickly her whole life. And actually she wasn't. In that first year she was, because of the misdiagnosis. She was at the worst. She was very weak. But once we got her all of the adequate nutrition and breathing, she actually balanced out. And she was still bubbly as ever. And such a personality. The whole time we were at Stanford, there's a million doctors coming in. And also when we were at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. And she was never intimidated or afraid. She would stop doctors in their tracks with their masks on, and they would be listening to her and doing different things without saying anything to her. And she would use all of her energy and winkle her little hand over and start tapping them.
Like, just want to interact and talk and converse in her way.
Yes. And then they immediately say, I'm so sorry. Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Oh. And then she would bat her eyes and keep tapping and smile. And all of these, she created this, she met people. She pulled something out of people. She possessed such a personality that she never spoke traditionally. And yet she spoke volumes to people without really ever saying a traditional word.
Oh my gosh, so much to explore. My thought is, because I know, at what point, because I assume that every time she defied, the doctor said that she's not going to live a year, and then she gets past that point. That must have been fueled your fire even more.
100%. Yeah. I always say, I think for anyone, the best first thing you can do is start. in the most simple way. I mean, we were literally, when we did come home, we were literally dropped off by an ambulance with 5 life-saving machines in our living room. And we were like, wait, what? This is our life now? What are we supposed to do? And then ambulance drivers were like, okay, later. And so it was like the idea of even just taking a simple walk with her felt like life and death. But we did that first walk, and then seeing her, and she'd never been to the park before. She'd never been to really, walk in the neighborhood. So just doing that first initial step and then seeing her light up is really what started everything. So it was redefining those limitations. We were told she would be living in the hospital her whole life. She would never go to school. She would be lucky to live to a year, definitely not beyond 2. And then each time she kind of continued forward, it gave us more and more courage. And even when, sometimes there was one time we didn't have even a proper wheelchair for her. So we literally had a little red wagon.
She's so tiny.
She was so tiny, and she had 5 machines.
Oh, wow.
And she had to be flat. So this was something unique. Even our stroller from our shower and all that stuff, it was elevated because most babies aren't flat all the time. And so we took this little red wagon. We lived close enough to our pediatrician that we could walk because we didn't have really a way to get all these machines in a car. So we were walking, and her breathing machine stopped. And so we literally had to run home. And that was devastating and scary and traumatic. But then we had this sense of this is her one life. So we're scared out of ourselves. But we have to find that resilience. We have to find that courage because she deserves it. She deserves that next adventure. And she loved them, She's never seen the beach. We've got to figure out how to get her there. And all of these little steps where it felt like it was us against the world just kept us moving forward and then, challenging even bigger systems. So yeah, I mean, really that each time she kept going, so did we.
And she lit up, like just the simple thing of, it just gives you such a different perspective of life when you are given a terminal diagnosis.
Yes.
And obviously it's just a child. You can dig to the deepest places. A mother can lift a car off of a child. You find a resilience that is just superhuman and amazing. And so it just brings us back to when you talk, I'm like, just that this life is so full of suffering in so many ways right now and throughout history. And I know that people are struggling right now. And to hear your story, it maybe puts us in perspective like, wow, like my struggles are not even near what those 3 people went through and are continuing to go through. But just like the beauty of going to the beach that lit her up, like life is just such a wild experience and a ride, and it's worth living even through all the pain and the suffering. It
really is. And I think, that's one of the things I think we as a culture really get stuck in when things aren't perfect, when things aren't even or like in the mind of how we planned they would be. We often live in this place of, well, when I achieve X, then I'll really live. Sometimes it can be so silly, like when I get married, I'll do the thing, or when I lose that 5 pounds, I'll do the thing, or whatever it is. And, I think going through losing my mom so early at a time where, I was still in a really self-centered phase of my life. I just turned 21. I was in college. And also just like getting her care was intense, and my whole life became cancer. And there was part of me that said, I want this to be over. And then it was. And then I really understood, oh, wow, no, this is it's never over. Now I carry all of this with me. And so with Gwendolyn, what I really embraced is the messy, the hard, the painful is life too. And we have to embrace it, because when we turn the page, you're never turning the page. You're never moving past the stuff that you experience. And actually, I think by embracing all of it, it allowed me to let go and not be constantly, and to actually truly live with her, instead of constantly be trying to prevent her death.
And, I just think that God works in the most beautiful and mysterious ways. And I'm sure you went through moments where you're just like, why? Again, why? Sure. And anger and rage and just like, this doesn't make any sense. What did I do to deserve this? And you took my mom at a young age. Now you're taking my baby, But I do think, like, as you tell this story, like your experience with your mom and just being overwhelmed, self-centered 21, 22-year-old girl, and having all of a sudden this burden of keeping your mom alive and figuring out all this stuff, and it's just too much for a child, because we are still children at that age, I think. But it did give you that going, oh, wait, I wish I had my mom back, and I wish I navigated that differently. Obviously, I couldn't have done it any other way, because that was me at the time. But based on that, God gave you that experience, and now you're in a position where, like, I don't care what the doctors say. I'm going to squeeze every ounce of nectar out of life to show this kid while she's here the beauty of life. And I'm gonna show up there and never give up, even when I'm tired or hopeless. Like, I have to give it my all, because I know that she's not going to be with us one day, and I don't want to have any regrets. Yeah.
And now, actually, and during Gwendolyn's life too. Obviously at first it was a lot, and I had lots of moments, but there was a point where I realized, oh wow, because I remember saying to someone, I could really use my mom right now. And almost saying it out loud, I realized, oh wow, she's with me. She helped me know what to do. And I lost her in that process, but I would have never been prepared to, I would not have been the mother that I was without having lost my mom. And that's where sometimes, and I think of that now, I would not be the mother I am now without having gone through everything I went through with Gwendolyn. I wouldn't be the person I am. And I am now in a place where I am grateful. And I realize that if I, obviously if you could wish on a crystal ball, if I were to wish away her disease, I would have never known the child that I love so dearly. I think we always say, like, our disease doesn't define us, or a disability doesn't define us, but in a lot of ways, especially because she was profoundly disabled. She couldn't sit up. She needed a machine to help her swallow, a machine to help her breathe. She couldn't speak traditionally, but she was not cognitively impacted at all. So internally, she was reading by the age of 4. She just couldn't express her thoughts in the same way. So she actually taught us how to communicate. She created a series of yes and no sounds and eye movement so that we could communicate. And she had amazing things to say and show us. And I think the bigger thing is she was 100% comfortable with who she was. She had always been disabled, and she accepted herself and loved herself and thought she was awesome, like most kids do, right?
Yeah.
Like, I love those moments when you on Instagram, you see kids singing to themselves in the mirror of "I'm fabulous," and she was just like that. And I think that's part of where a lot of my disability advocacy has come from, because I think culturally we have yet to catch up. I know so many people who are disabled who have beautiful lives. Of course, there are things that are hard and challenging, but they still love their lives. And I think as able-bodied people, we're so often quick to dismiss the inherent value that actually a disability brings. I think Gwendolyn saw the world with a different perspective because of her disability. She certainly helped me see the world differently because of it.
Wow.
And I think I grew and gained a perspective that is valuable.
Yes. I have a stepson who was born at, I don't know the exact details, but I think at like around 5 months. He was a twin. The other twin didn't survive. So it was like, he was less than a pound or around a pound. He was Guinness Book of World Records of like smallest surviving child. And so this was my husband's first wife, and they went through this process, and it was the same. Like the doctor was like, he's going to be, like you just should put him in a home and kind of write it off, And my husband was like, no, I'm going to raise him as a normal kid. He's going to be, and he's got, so he's cerebral palsy and some developmental stuff, but he's like a high functioning, amazing 40-year-old now, like out in life, basically the mayor of Beverly Hills. Yeah. It's wild, the personality of this guy. And he's so, what he lacks in some faculties, he makes up in like spades in others. Like he's so sensitive, beautiful heart, very intuitive, just, so funny, so witty, so smart. It's crazy, but it's that's the choice of like that a parent can make. There's so like never let anybody's status quo or statistic define you or your child's life, and you're living proof of that. When you said that, she declined so quickly and she perhaps might have passed away in the night, and it would have been called SIDS. Like, how rare is this disease? And is it SMA? Mm-hmm. How rare is SMA? And do you think there's a portion of SIDS cases that are undiagnosed SMA?
Absolutely, especially in the past. So 1 in roughly 40 to 50 people are carriers of this. And we walk around, we have no idea we're carriers. And it takes getting together with another person who also is walking around with not knowing they're a carrier. And then we each pass on a lack of a gene. So it's a missing gene is basically what happens. And so we have backups, and we have enough for us, we aren't affected at all. We're completely functioning. And it's not every pregnancy. So every pregnancy has basically a 50% chance, or 25% chance, excuse me. So
if both parents are carriers, or just one? Okay.
If both parents. So yeah, you can as just a carrier, you can pass on your carrier status. So through time, we get more and more carriers, and then the odds of getting together with another carrier get higher and higher. But even 2 carriers can have 5 children and it never come up, and it's then the 6th one that it just happens. For us, it was our first. Our other 2 aren't even carriers. So it's what they call a common rare disease, because the likelihood of you being the 1 in 40 number is high, but then the likelihood of actually getting it's about 1 in every 10,000 births.
Okay.
But the reality is, until newborn screening, which is recent, we really have no real actual information on how many children are diagnosed. These are all, the 1 in 40 and 1 in 50 number are all estimations. And most children who die from SIDS do not undergo an autopsy and are not being tested for SMA. But what we do know is, I personally know several families that they lost a child to SIDS, and then they had a baby with SMA. Guarantee that first one was SMA as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so part of your advocacy, rather quickly, you guys, so now did they test for the carrier gene before? Like I did genetic testing. Is that something that they test normally? Did they test that with you guys?
No. So before we even had children, I went in and I said, okay, what do I need to do? And they said, oh, nothing. Wait till you're pregnant, then you test. we have more of a knee-jerk reaction here in this country. And so that always kind of stuck with me. And then when I was screened, I was just screened for the most basic things, and SMA was not on it, even though it is considered common.
Yeah.
But it wasn't screened because this is the part where it gets really frustrating. The disease itself was patented. So the test for it, a drug company owned.
Shut up.
Yes. And so obviously we should not be able to patent our own human genes. And cystic fibrosis is the opposite. So cystic fibrosis was discovered in the early 80s and was patented for the greater good of humanity. And so it literally, that's why we're all screened for that disease, because it costs 3 cents. And so the SMA test should cost 3 cents, or should have then, but they were charging $1,000 per test. So OBs weren't recommending it, because how could they recommend that when so few people would get it, and so forth. That has since changed. That was one of the first areas we started challenging. And we worked with some startups and up in San Francisco, and they actually created a test and challenged this whole patent notion. And so that's all now been kind of usurped.
Cool.
Because, and not just SMA, but many other diseases, because it's unethical.
Totally.
And so that was also one of the reasons why they didn't test Gwendolyn in the hospital, to see even if she had it, for the same reason. It was the cost of the test was being controlled by these drug companies.
And then, the doctor, it seems like when you were saying that, it seems like he didn't even suggest that as a diagnosis, because the test is so expensive and the outcome is not good. So it's like, what family's going to want to spend $1,000 to get news that their child's going to die within months?
Exactly. And then, because there were no traditional treatments, newborn screening was not implemented, even though so many children were misdiagnosed and died before they even actually got a diagnosis. And if you get these kind of preventative measures, like a feeding tube and a breathing tube, or just certain things, so you feed differently, which are not treatments, but they prolong life. And if you're doing those before the disease progresses, that is the key. And so most people weren't getting that until the child was really far progressed. So all of it was a very rapid decline. And so we challenged that. We said there are treatments, not actual drug treatments, but there are things you can do to slow the progression now. And so we started writing letters to the different authorities that decide that. And what ended up happening is, once the actual, we were funding research, and once the research started to get into clinical trial, then they started to really consider it. And so working with the scientists, we got everything all set up so that ACOG could recommend SMA testing. And then it goes state by state, which is frustrating because some states are very slow. But now basically about 95% of Americans are screened for SMA at birth, which is very, very critical, because there are 3 treatments now, 3 FDA-approved treatments. But all of them, they work best pre-symptomatic. So
the earlier you know.
Absolutely. So newborn screening is critical. Yeah. And so if, you can literally get gene replacement therapy, which we helped fund, at 2 weeks of age, and you will have no signs of the disease.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what has been some of the conversations between those kids' lives that you've saved because of your work, and the parents? Like, oh, that's like amazing.
Yeah, they have no idea that, like, the kids, like, they're running around busy toddlers. You would have no idea that they have the disease at all, and they know nothing else. The parents, it's interesting. Some very much get it. Some struggle because they feel like their child still has this diagnosis, and the treatments have not been around long enough for us to know what the long term.
Got it.
But there has been no decline, even in the kids who are in the clinical trial, who all received it much later than birth. So the outlook is very, very positive, but there's that unknown. So I understand for the parents, they worry. But some read the room and really understand kind of how far things have progressed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the sad part is that, we really rallied other families, and so many of them, I'm such a big believer that we all have the power to do something. And what I found is, gosh, it doesn't matter. Give people the control. They decide. And we had families across the country who were literally saving their child's life every day. And yet this being empowered to do something, to just be called to raise $5,000 in their small town, that gave them, they went from no hope to just having that energy. It's positive. It's a positive in your life. And then you rally around your community, so you don't feel so alone. So it has all these different impacts when we do that for each other. And, it was beautiful to see. I mean, families, there was one family who she shaved her head, the mom did, created like a prom, and the dad shaved his beard. He'd never not had a beard. And then all these different women stood up and shaved their heads, and it was all for this little girl, Lucy. And, Lucy will never benefit from these treatments. And yet we all did it anyway. And I think that there's, that was the part that in even starting funding treatments, because Gwendolyn already was so weak and had already lost so much muscle mass, there was a kernel of hope in me for sure. How could there not be? I'm a mother. But I knew, like, in my soul that I wouldn't be able to save my child's life. But I always, feel it doesn't mean that I should just do nothing. Because if I'm not going to do it, if I'm the most affected by this, then who is? And I think so often we complain about, well, that should be different and someone should do that. Well, we each can be that someone. And I think so often we don't, I had zero kills. I'm not a scientist. I had never really fundraised in my life beyond Girl Scout cookies. So I didn't come into this like, well, I've got the answers.
Right.
But I believed in the power of the individual. And then, it was really a beautiful kind of movement. My husband and I were parents first, and we believed. And so then that our efforts mattered. That trickled down to families who had lost their child. And so they said, you know what, this is a great way to honor my child's life. And then that trickled to others and all across the country and into Canada and Europe too. Individual families were doing these efforts. And pretty soon, what we really realized too is it really doesn't take that much money to add another researcher into the lab. And having one more body in there can actually help just answer more questions. And so we were, Bill and I think we weren't as intimidated by the scientists. They were just like us. They were parents. They cried with us on the phone. I mean, that was maybe one of the big differences is we talked to all of them in the very beginning, and they were so kind, and we kept those relationships going. So when we got our feet under us, we called them again and said, okay, what exactly do you need? What's going to help you the most? And a lot of times it was really simple, like, well, we need this expensive microscope, and it costs, $100,000. Okay, we're going to figure out how to raise that money and do that. And then when that was successful, it's like, okay, what's the next thing? And so often it was like $100,000, sometimes $50,000 could make or break a lab. And then one of the other challenges, a lot of the researchers who had dedicated their entire professions were starting to get older, and they were worried there's no young people getting involved. Okay, so let's put our heads together. How can we get young researchers involved? So we created an emerging investigator program where the different researchers would submit their projects, and the scientists would work. They would really do the analysis of which projects would win, but we were part of it, and we would then gift them a financial reward, and we would then highlight their research, and they would get this recognition. And so we had this kind of incentive program for several years. And some of those researchers now have dedicated their whole lives to SMA and are some of the ones who have brought forth the most groundbreaking, new ideas that have led to treatments.
That is so amazing. And also, like, I feel like just having that personal story where you guys are in the trenches with a child that's chubby and bubbly and like showing such vibrant hope in herself, and you guys are so driven to overcome the odds and give her every chance and change the system. And I feel like that breathes life into a scientist and gives them extra motivation too. So it's just this, like, I don't know, it's just such a beautiful unfoldment.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. It did. And without us even knowing, apparently they put her picture up in labs all across the country. And when she died, I got the most beautiful messages from people I had never even met, who said that very thing, that it breathed life into the lab and reminded them why they were pulling all-nighters sometimes and working so hard. So sometimes, like, the things we do, we don't even know the ripple effect that comes from them. And, a lot of the stuff we were doing was not big. We didn't need our name on it. We would just do the thing. I don't, I think that's a lesson in everything so often. And that's true, really for anything, right? So often we're just so hard on ourselves to just start. And I think we just have to remind ourselves to believe that we won't know the outcome now. I mean, when we started, we never thought there would be 3 FDA-approved treatments in really the matter of 10 years, which is
unheard of. Yeah.
But we did believe that the research that we were funding would not only help SMA, we truly believed that it would help answer some questions. And we also thought it would help answer for other diseases too. There's such a connection to so many, and when you talk about gene therapy, the genetics, there's so much overlap. And, so that for some people was the reason. I just felt it didn't stop with just us. And it wasn't just, an impact on one family. This had potential to really impact science, which it has.
Yeah. And if you're comfortable sharing, I don't know what your faith beliefs are, what they were before, if they changed during, but I just feel like everything to me is spiritual. All the realizations that I've got on this journey of heal, it just comes back to like the belief in this benevolent, loving, intelligent source that governs the cosmos and us and all, that we come from and we'll go back to. So what do you believe spiritually, whether it's about life or, souls coming into this lifetime, what Gwendolyn chose, like what is your perspective on that now that you've been through this? And I'm sure you still feel her presence around.
It's interesting. I definitely struggled with religion during her life. But I also, there was an undeniable force that I couldn't explain, who she was. And she would walk into a room or roll into a room and literally kids would come running from all over. And they always had questions, the obvious ones, like what's wrong with her. But as soon as I met them with answering it, then they immediately were like, let's play. And they looked in her eyes and it's like there was this soul connection. And that happened constantly. And she made people do things they never thought they would do. Run races, for example, as a fundraiser, or these grumpy scientists suddenly saying, we never thought of it that way. I don't know why we're doing it like this. Let's try it a new way.
Ooh, that's
yeah,
big.
right?
That's big.
Yes. Yeah. There were so many kind of shifts that I feel like she possessed this power, that she came to this earth and she did her job. Like it really did feel like she lived her life in a complete way. Now, I wasn't ready. I was devastated. And that is where then now I, losing someone who was my whole life. I mean, my whole existence revolved around her. My husband and I never left her side, really. We would take turns. But even when she was hospitalized, we slept in her bed with her. Then we did all of the treatments, not the nurses. They would watch us, and we'd teach them how to do it for the next child, because it was her care was so nuanced. And, speaking the way she spoke, I could understand on an intuitive level, and we would have these huge conversations about, disability and being included and the things that she was struggling with. And so I know, when she died, I didn't, it was so confusing. And I had some undeniable experiences of her presence and messages from her. On her birthday, which was just a few months after she died, we went to her gravesite, and obviously it was, my husband and I were a wreck, and we had her sister. So my middle child, it was only 18 months old when Gwendolyn died. And she had been going around the house saying, where's Sissy? Where's Sissy? For about 2 months. And we arrived at the cemetery. Within 5 seconds, our little one, who had never done anything like this before, started slapping her knee, like, oh, shucks, kind of slap, which is a very odd thing for a little toddler to do. She was doing that, and she was pointing next to her. And she was saying, Sissy, Sissy.
Wow.
And we didn't have a name plaque yet or anything. We didn't have anything physical she was pointing to. She was pointing to an area, and she was saying, like, as much as she could at her, limited vocabulary at that time. And I felt Gwendolyn's presence, and, there are these, and then it's like I started now over time, I started to reflect on those moments when I felt my mom's presence, but I denied it. And I thought, oh, that's silly. That's rubbish. That can't be real. And what I realized is, I think, life and death there's so much more of a connection and the spiritual world than we allow ourselves to accept, that we allow ourselves to feel. And I think one of the beautiful gifts of deep grief is that veil is closer. And so while, for other families who have lost a child, the grief phase, the deep grief phase, is so suffocating, it's also such a beautiful experience, and realizing the existence of more life than we even knew.
That's beautiful. I want to talk about, well, we have a little time. So the next question I wanted to talk about was grief. Because you were in a unique situation where you were kind of grieving while she was still alive, I imagine. And then it's a whole different deep grief when she's actually gone. Yeah. So can you share, I guess, any insights or advice or anecdotes about that process that could help someone going through something similar?
Yeah, I think that, a terminal diagnosis is an interesting time period, and it's very specific because we're given this gift of time, but it doesn't feel like a gift. But I definitely, and then, like for Gwendolyn, for something like SMA, where there's, very serious medical challenges along the way. So, I mean, there were points of her life where we were saving her life almost every day. And it would be as simple as she choked on her own saliva. And then we'd have to figure out how to just carry on. So we would be traumatized, and then like, okay, let's go. So you learn kind of how to numb, which isn't always great. And then there's, anticipatory grief. So there were definitely nights where I dreamt about losing her, and, and periods, and your body literally like starts to try and prepare you. And all of that can paralyze you, can prevent you from venturing out, from living. And so that was one of the things that, literally while she was having a surgery, I called a therapist and I was like, okay, we need it.
Yeah.
Because it was literally, it was like, if I don't get therapy now, when do you get it? Mm-hmm. And so it was like, okay, these are our scenarios, our limitations. We can't leave her alone. So this therapist came to our home, and we would have her on a baby monitor and literally like a hands away. And we started talking through some of this stuff. So already starting to work on the grief. And that was huge because it helped give me tools. I think, tools I did not have with my mom. My dad's British. We had a lot of stiff upper lip.
I was wondering where rubbish came from. You said rubbish. I was like, is she British? Yeah.
There was some great resilience in there.
Yeah.
But I think that also left me just like a mess, not knowing how to truly live with grief. Mm-hmm. And so, I took that self-help, basically. How can I help myself be better than last time? How can I learn from last time? And so I started doing that literally from, the moment she was diagnosed. And that continued. There were times where things would come up where we would hit a rough patch. And that's when I knew I needed to dig into a new thing I hadn't really pushed on myself. And I think every time I dug a little more in my own self-discovery, it helped me let go and really just be less afraid of the dark, less afraid of grief itself, and realize that is part of life. And then, I read a lot of other, unfortunately, where we were, I attended more funerals than I did weddings and baby showers because of the disease. And so
because you were surrounded by
I was surrounded by SMA or other rare diseases, and so there was just constant child loss. Oh my gosh. And I instead of blocking that out and trying to pretend that's not going to happen, I found I absorbed everything. And it was usually the women, although there were a few men that did it, but usually the mothers would share. And it was gut-wrenching. But I learned so much from each of them, and they really helped pave my way. And so when I did lose Gwendolyn, one of the very first things I told myself is, I'm going to grieve deeply because I loved deeply, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. You can, and I think especially society, I had another child, so I think, there are sometimes this pressure of you have to pretend, and I thought, no, we're not going to pretend. We're not going to, I don't think this is going to traumatize my child to see me cry. That's human. Yeah. And if, what a lesson that all emotions are okay. Mm-hmm. And guess what? She's one of the most,
emotional quotient, high
yes,
EQ.
She does. Yeah. She has high EQ.
Yeah.
But I think, that's for anyone who's going through it, it is hard work, but it is also a beautiful process. And it's a way, I think anytime I start to struggle with grief, and I try new different healing modalities, and I'm a big fan of that. Try things, even if it seems not you, try it once. Mm-hmm. And then if it doesn't work, try something else, and just keep, trying these different things. There's nothing that is going to snap you out of missing your child. But I think that each thing we learn some tools in how to release some of the grief. And then just one more thing I will say on it is the part of the grief of or the gift of grieving during Gwendolyn's life is I really learned about the grace that you can be laughing and devastated all in the same moment. Those are not opposites. By from the moment we were hospitalized with this diagnosis that we would lose her, we were also cherishing every sweet little chubby thigh roll and painting her little baby toes. And, you know, it was like all in one breath. And they weren't I'll do this and then this. It was all together. And that's life.
Yeah.
We are bigger than the boxes we try and put ourselves in. And that's also one of the things that gave me a lot of, I think, helped me once I did lose her, because I knew I could still laugh at my little middle child and enjoy life and the beauty of childhood, and or the sunsets, or, you know, those the fresh air and my ability to breathe deeply, and what a gift that is, while also so sad and missing my daughter.
Yeah. It's not black and white, our human experience and spectrum of emotions. And yeah, I think that, you know, hopefully all of these experiences and just me and the journey that I'm on, it's like just in the last few years, like just even being able to name, as I'm consciously or attempting to consciously parent my child, and like learning that, oh, they just need to be seen and validated, and so to start naming their feelings to help them define what they're actually feeling. We didn't get that growing up, and our parents didn't get it, their parents didn't get it, so we've never really been taught as a society how to feel. Of course, a few people have had enlightened childhoods or enlightened parents, but even like 3 years ago, I was in the shower and I was just verklempt with emotion, if that's the right term, and I'm like, what do I even feel? I don't know if it was frustration, anger, rage, sadness, devastate. Like, I couldn't even name what I was feeling as an adult. And so, you know, just to go through that process and to be able to teach, you know, your other two children how to feel, and feeling is okay, and it's not, you know, mutually exclusive. It's like it can be all at once, and that's the beauty and I think the purpose of being human. And so much of our society today is to escape feeling or shut down feeling. And so I'm just like sitting here like raw crying the whole interview, you know, and I'm like, but this is the beauty of being human, is to feel, you know, and of course you don't want it to be a freight train taking you away in a, you know, puddle on the floor and you can't function in life. But that's the beauty of growth and transformation, and being in the fire and feeling it all, and not having to have it together all the time.
And I think when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to that, like to the feeling it all and then feeling like, oh, I'm such a mess, right? When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it really allows us to see others and our shared humanity. And that is actually really the essence of, I think, the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what we need now, connection, community, and compassion for people and their struggles, and which brings us to kind of what you're working on now, which is inclusion and play, and this amazing playground that you and Bill are have developed and are creating, and is going to break ground soon in 2024. So tell us about Gwendolyn's Playground.
Yeah, so it started all, you know, really organically. We lived down the street from a playground, and it was when I was pregnant. I thought it was, you know, so cool. It looks like a castle and very natural. But then when we had a little baby on one of our early walks, we tried to bring that wagon in and immediately hit all the bark and the wood chips. We couldn't get the wagon just over to the swing. We knew there was nothing that she could actually play on, but the swing, we thought, well, we could put her on our lap and she could swing. And it took two of us we had to pick it up, carry it over there. And so I knew it was something I couldn't just go do on my own. And that seemed absurd. Like, wait, what? What about the ADA? I thought the Americans with Disability Act, like, made everything accessible. I thought that was a rule. So fast forward, you know, our focus then was research, but fast forward to, you know, when Gwendolyn demanded a very, very social life. It started really simply with, you know,
play groups. I had, friends who also had babies the same age, and we just would meet at their houses. And she was so social, and it was so cute. Though, I mean, these literally like toddlers who were all wearing diapers and barely walking would run, hell for leather to her, and then stop right when they got close and give her a kiss. It's like they innately knew. They would put stickers all over her, and she would giggle, and she just loved being around kids. And everywhere we went, kids were drawn to her. And so, we started really simply. We were very worried about germs, but we started with a little music class. And she thrived. She loved it so much. She wanted to be in the middle of the parachute like everyone, and all these, and so then it was, I guess we're doing preschool. Now, finding a preschool that was accessible was another eye-opening experience. I had no idea that the ADA actually doesn't require preschools to be accessible. So it's legal for an entire town to not have any place for a disabled child to go to preschool.
That's wild.
Yeah, because they're private, right? Preschools are private. So that seemed, and it was another kind of aha moment of like, this is crazy. I don't understand the system. The system is definitely not equitable, and not allowing, it is actually segregating the disabled population. And so as she got older and older, all of that became more and more apparent. Now, she ended up, through kind people, ended up having a wonderful preschool experience, and I went with her, or my husband went with her every day to make it happen. And then when it came time for kindergarten, she enrolled in the Par Public School. She had an RN with her. I was also with her, but within like literally the first, I did everything usually. I helped her communicate. I helped her use her arms. And but she fell in love with her nurse, and also I think she was 5 and looking for independence.
Yeah.
And she literally told me on the first day of school, go staple with the other moms. I mean, in her way, but I knew what she was saying, and so I slunk back, and I got to witness just this beautiful evolution of her independence. And each month she got more and more and more independent. Wow. And the kids were so accepting. So one of the wonderful things about being in, not being in a specialized classroom, but actually being in a mainstream classroom, was then she was a peer. And so I witnessed these, I answered all of their questions, and that's, that has to be expected. They're curious. All of these things were different. So we explained what everything did, and I mirrored language that we preferred. And I always tried to bring it back. Like, she is born with spinal muscular atrophy, which affects your lungs. Can you take a deep breath? And I would show them, and they would say, oh yeah, that takes a lot of muscles. And I'd say, yeah, so that she just needs a little help with her muscles. And I said, but we're all unique, right? We're all unique. And then literally within a week, we would be out on the playground, and some bigger kids would come over, and what's wrong with her? And these 5-year-olds, sometimes some of them were even 4, would whip around and say, there's nothing wrong with her. Don't you know we're all unique? And I just saw like this beautiful.
But they just needed to learn. They
just
needed to learn the language and the understanding, and then they could become heroes and defenders.
And they, on their own, figured out how to change games. I did not ask them to do that. They were changing games so that Gwendolyn could be part of it. They would invent games so that, she was in the middle. At PE, they would like beg to be on her team, even though that meant it was kind of done differently. They didn't care. They just wanted to be with her and make sure she was part of it. As they got a little older, she was in the hip hop after school dance program, and I heard all of the little girls go and tell the principal and advocate for the elevator to be fixed, because it's not fair that Gwendolyn can't be on the stage, and she's our peer. She shouldn't have to be down on the floor. Wow. So guess what? The district got that elevator fixed. I mean, they became little advocates, and it was all just having a peer who was different from themselves. But they looked at it as, well, we're all different. Bobby wears glasses and I have red hair. Like, they would say things like that. Like, she just needs
a little help. And to witness that, I realized, I felt like I was constantly just given hope for humanity every single day in this classroom. And each year that we changed, and it was a whole bunch of new kids and all of this, it was just, and to see how it then evolved across the whole school. These older kids were doing the same thing. You know, it was really a beautiful thing to witness, and teaching their parents. It was, and then their parents were even more, would start to use the language that their kids taught them.
And I remember being in classes in my public high school, and there'd be kids in wheelchairs, and they would be, you know, and I think as you're describing this, you know, there's part of our human nature is to be intimidated by things we don't understand. Yes. and difference. You know, and then obviously we see where that ends up if that's let go
Yes.
wild, right? But with a little awareness, a little education, and a little connection.
Yes.
That is all you need. And then it just completely shifts the paradigm.
It does. And I think
that's what we need.
Yeah. I think what you said is the absolute element. It's exposure, awareness, that tools, the education, and then, you know, allowing these opportunities to actually get to know another person who is different from ourselves. Yeah. And I think that's true for everything. So the playground stemmed really organically, seeing how Gwendolyn had a very inclusive life, and realizing, you know, even other kids in our town did not have the same experience. And then knowing so many other SMA children were not going to school full time. You know, they might live in winter climates, or they were more sickly or so forth, so they only were homeschooled. And so the playground, a public space, sometimes is the only chance a child has for a social kind of setting and to feel like they belong and part of the community. And so I had this kind of moral indignation that every child should be able to play. That is, you know, the most basic right of childhood is play. And so if we're using our taxpayer dollars to create something that creates segregation, I'm not okay with that. Yeah. So it started with that simple kind of statement, right? But then realizing, you know, seeing Gwendolyn, how the kids who had typical needs, their lives were so impacted by knowing Gwendolyn, and realizing that we're all missing out by not having this opportunity for connection. And so it evolved more and more. And then, you know, talking to other families and realizing some of the things for children with autism who often are runners. The most common question I get actually is, can you make sure there's a fence? Well, it turns out my youngest was also a runner. And so it's like, yeah, everyone benefits from safety. There's some of the things that an inclusive space provides are really not that difficult. Right. And when I really started studying, you know, what the best practices of play around the country, I realized like most of our playgrounds really haven't changed since the 70s and 80s. And we've just been doing the same thing over and over. And why? Why do we do that when it's not like, there's so much more innovation, there's so many more better products, let's innovate and be better. And so so I partnered up with some other nonprofits and who are doing this work in other cities, and they really helped be guides for me. And then I studied a lot of the European playgrounds are actually wonderful models of multi-generational play. And seeing the grandparents out there, and I thought, okay, well, we need that. And so it's really, you know, kind of breaking that mold of what we've been doing for decades and saying, what is the kind of space that really brings people together, celebrates our differences, and really it means community. And so that's going to be, you know, all ages, you know, people who feel safe. And so, so what we've created is really, really special. There's a lot of things that are custom. But then there are some really, you know, the great thing is the play movement has evolved from that time when I very first thought of it when she was a baby. Now, almost all play companies have an inclusive line.
And so it's just a matter of selecting the right products and making sure you don't use bark because I've seen where they'll put this wonderful inclusive equipment right in the middle of bark.
Or
I'm like,
sand.
no,
or
no.
something,
Yeah, or sand. Like that defeats the purpose. So for me, it's so much bigger than a playground. It is about, really dismantling stigma. I think, the playground, we're taking our children to the playground when they're babies. And so it's a very first opportunity. It's like a child's first classroom. It's their first chance to really look around and see that the world is much bigger than just our own little bubble. And so we're doing some cool things. We're actually one of the kind of non-playground things that we're going to have a custom-built trailer that's a coffee cart.
Oh, cool.
And we're employing adults with disabilities and teens with disabilities alongside their typical peers. So this serves two purposes. One, as a tired parent, you can get to the park when nothing else is open and get a coffee.
Genius,
right? And then if you brought the wrong snacks, like I always seem to do, there's an opportunity for something for your child, right?
Cool.
But then also it gives this daily opportunity to normalize disability, seeing disabled people in the workplace and that and out in our community. I mean, honestly, a big part of why I think so much with disability rights hasn't changed is people with disabilities are segregated. They're segregated in classrooms, because of lack of accessibility in the public world. They're segregated in, just daily activities. And so often employment is such a challenge. I mean, over 80% of disabled adults who want to be employed, who have the capability of being employed, are not. That's a crazy statistic.
Yeah.
And so I think, we can do so much better. And while it's a really simple idea, every child deserves to play, it has a much bigger purpose about, commenting on our social fabric and how to actually change the way we view each other.
Yeah, I think it's so important just for us to, have the opportunity to expose our children and ourselves and just, again, it's just such a beautiful thing you've created, and to see it from both sides, and it just benefits everybody. It benefits the community, and it brings out the best in humanity, like you said. So, and the moms get coffee.
Yeah, the moms get coffee at like an ungodly hour, right? It's usually they get up so early, and nothing's open. And then, remember that phase? I mean, mine are older now, but just the driving around because there's nothing else to do, and then unbuckling them to get the coffee and then rebuckling them so saving those steps.
It's genius. It really is. So where can people find more about you and GSF and this playground? Just how can they get involved? Never Give Up.
So it's really easy. nevergiveup.org is our website, and then we're on social media on nevergiveup.org, no dot. So at nevergiveup.org. Yeah.
Cool.
And I post regularly. It's really just me. We're not a big team. And so I definitely believe this is a movement, and I would love to help others who want to bring inclusive play to their communities. And I'm always available for anyone who's going through grief or has a new diagnosis. I definitely am here to help. So feel free to reach out.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. I'm in awe of all you've been able to accomplish and do, and what you still do. Your heart is pure gold.
Oh,
so
thank you. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming down. Thank you for listening to the Heal Podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. And please rate and review us so that we can grow and reach more people. Thanks so much, and be well.